happy to talk about Supercommunicators with you, which is this book by Charles Duhigg. And maybe you've heard about it, maybe not, but if you haven't heard about it, you should know about it. From the very first page, Supercommunicators gripped me not with complex theory, but with profound humanity. I found myself unexpectedly in tears halfway through chapter 3. Not because it was sad, but because I saw myself and my misunderstandings and my struggles to connect and in my yearning to be truly heard. Charles Duhigg doesn't just write about communication. He holds up a mirror and gently asks, "Are you really listening?" Reading this book felt like having a deeply honest conversation with a wise friend. Duhigg weaves science, storytelling, and strategy into something that feels simultaneously intimate and empowering. I kept highlighting phrases, rereading anecdotes, and texting excerpts to people I love. This is more than a book. It's a quiet revolution against the noise and a guide toward connection that is real, kind, and effective. Whether you're navigating a difficult relationship, leading a team, raising a child, or just trying to understand yourself, Super Communicators opens the door to a more compassionate way of being with others. Doug reminds us that communication isn't about the perfect words. It's about the courage to meet each other where we are. After closing the book, I felt a little more hopeful and a lot more connected. Charles Duhigg is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and best-selling author, best known for The Power of Habit. Born in New York, Mexico, Duhigg grew up surrounded by storytelling, which deeply shaped his curiosity for what drives human behavior. Before becoming an author, he reported for the New York Times on business productivity and human psychology, topics that eventually led him to write books blending science with human narratives. What makes Derek particularly compelling is his obsession with patterns, not just in habits, but in how we talk, argue, connect, and change. He earned his MBA from Harvard Business School, yet he writes with a warmth that transcends the academic tone. Duhigg's reporting is sharp, but his deeper gift is empathy. He listens. That quality shines through in all his work. His lifelong fascination with what makes people tick and how we can become more intentional in our everyday lives has helped millions rethink their routines, mindsets, and relationships. For super communicators, Diagno turns that focus inward, exploring the space between people and what allows us to bridge it. Super communicators were spawned out of his realization that even the most brilliant strategies fall flat if people aren't truly connecting. After interviewing hundreds of people from different backgrounds, couples in therapy, corporate leaders, teachers, and even negotiators in conflict zones, he noticed a recurring pattern. Those who excel at life aren't just perseverers, they are deeply attuned to others. The book is deeply personal for Dahak, whose own communication challenges, both as a parent and partner, nudged him to ask, why do some conversations change everything while others leave us stuck? He didn't want to write another how to on public speaking or leadership charisma. Instead, he sought to decode what great communicators actually do that allows them to cross divides emotional, political, relational, and leave people feeling safe and seeing them. He was particularly motivated by the state of public discourse, where polarization and misunderstanding are rampant. What if, he wondered, we could teach people to talk better, not just louder? The result is a book filled with stories that illustrate how subtle shifts in attention, empathy, and intention can radically improve the way we relate to others. True connection begins when we stop trying to win conversations and start trying to understand the people in them. So, I would like to give you, from my reading, 7 tips. Identify the conversation type. Every conversation is one of 3 types: emotional, practical, or social. Knowing which one you're in changes everything. Mirror emotions, not words. Repeating someone's feelings back to them helps them feel heard on a deeper level. Ask the second question. People often reveal more after the first answer. Real connection lies in the follow up. Use looping for understanding. Paraphrase what the other person said and ask if you got it right. This builds clarity and trust. Share vulnerability, but wisely. Opening up first often gives others permission to do the same, but timing and tone matter. Avoid hijacking the conversation. Resist turning the story into yours. Hold space instead of redirecting. And see disagreement as discovery. Rather than debating, get curious. Differences reveal deeper truths when we listen well. So these tips are some I wanted to give you, and now I would like to read from this book. In the spring of 1937, a chain store magnate named Billy Grant approached Harvard University with a proposition. Grant had dropped out of high school decades earlier, but then had gone on to make a fortune selling kitchen supplies and household wares at 25-cent stores across the nations. Now, at the age of 61, he wanted to give back to society through a large donation, and he told Harvard's administrators to achieve a secondary, more practical goal. He explained that he oversaw a growing empire and was hiring rapidly. His executives needed research, data, and scientific insights to assist them in choosing the best store managers and the smartest employers. So, Grant offered to donate a small fortune to the university to fund the school's general sex research, as long as their scholars might consider his matter and offer some advice. Harvard's administrators thought the request was a bit crass, not worthy of the school's lovely academic ambitions. But a donation is a donation, and they already knew how they would use the money. So they said yes. For years, faculty and the medical school had wanted to conduct a long term longitudinal study of, as they put it, healthy young men. In particular, they wanted to recruit hundreds of Harvard undergraduates and follow them for decades, examining such issues as the problem of nature versus nurture, connections between personality and health, whether mental and physical illnesses can be predicted, how constitutional considerations might influence career choice. The plan essentially was to take Rand's money and, in addition to trying to figure out what made someone good at selling spatulas, collect data on people's fitness, family schooling, work, emotional impulses, and physical characteristics. The participants would undergo extensive on campus medical exams and psychological interviews, and then be asked to fill out detailed surveys delivered via the mail and home visits by researchers for the rest of their lives. Once all data started rolling in, the researchers would look for patterns that explained why some participants became happy, gainful, employed, healthy adults, while others did not. The project initially was known as the Grand Study, and over the following years it slowly expanded. Eventually, a group of teens from South Boston's Tenements were enrolled, and then, as various participants married and had children, their spouses and offsprings were included as well. Over time, more than 2,000 men and women were poked, prodded, interviewed, and given psychiatry interviews. Today, the Harvard study of adult development is one of the largest, longest, and most famous studies in its history. Among the first of the participants to be interviewed were two young men who had enrolled at Harvard in the years leading up to World War II. The first was an undergraduate who researchers developed was a neurotic hypochondriac. Godfrey Camel, one researcher wrote, not too kindly, was a disaster. He had been raised away from other families and children because his parents were pathological suspicious. Oh, when a researcher interviewed Camille's mother, he deemed her one of the most nervous people I have ever met. And the psychologist determined that Camille had one of the bleakest childhoods I had ever seen. Camille arrived at Harvard in 1938 and almost instantly seemed overwhelmed. He visited the infirmary regularly, complaining of so many mysterious illnesses that one physician noted in his file that this boy is turning into a regular psychoneurotic. He was skinny, physically weak, and struggled to make friends. When America entered the war, Camille, like most Harvard men, enlisted in the military. But whereas many of his classmates were promoted to officers and returned home with ribbons and medals, Camille was still a private when he was honorable discharge, with no significant accomplishments to speak of. He then attended medical school, but shortly after graduation attempted suicide, which made him an outcast in Boston's medical community. He grew so distant from his family that when his sister and mother died, he hardly mentioned their deaths in his follow-up stories. At age 35, he was hospitalized for 14 months for pulmonary tuberculosis. I was glad to be sick, he later told the researcher. I can go to bed for a year. The other young man from the period was different. John Marston was an exceptional student and came from a wealthy and prominent family that ran a dry goods franchise in Cleveland. Marston also volunteered for World War II, served voluntarily, and then, rather than accede to his father's wishes to join the family businesses, he followed his passion and enrolled in the University of Chicago's law school, where he graded near the top of his class. He became a public service lawyer, got married, and eventually started a successful private practice. The grand study had been designed with the aim of objectivity. The researchers wanted to avoid guessing which of the participants were likely to soar or stumble, lest those prejudgments taint the data. But when it came to Camille and Marston, it was hard to avoid predictions. It was clear to everyone that Camille was likely to end up depressed and lonely, or perhaps dead by his own hand. Everyone had predicted he would be a loser, one researcher wrote, whereas Marston, the scientist, assumed would become a leader in his community, another chapter in his family's proud legacy. Marston, a researcher noted, is one of the more professionally successful members of the study. Then, in 1954, 16 years after it began, the study's funding ran out. Billy Grant had by now donated the equivalent of $7 billion in today's dollars and was frustrated that the study hadn't revealed much that was helpful about selecting store managers. Even worse, Harvard had failed to sufficiently mention his generosity when the university occasionally published studies. Grant was done shelling out money. He told administrators. The researchers scrambled to find alternative sources of funding. At one point, they convinced a collection of tobacco companies to fund the project by suggesting their work might reveal positive reasons for smoking. But eventually, that support dried up. So, for the most part, the study was boxed up and stashed in the basement of the medical school. That would have been the end of the story, except that in the early 1970s, a group of young psychiatry professors started digging through those boxes and stumbled upon the project surveys. And sure good, they began tracking down the participants, sending them new questionnaires and scheduling follow-up interviews. They expected to find that most participants had kept traveling alone, the same trajectories as when the studies had ended. When they spoke to Camille and Marston, though, they discovered that assumption was completely wrong. In the intervening decades, it seems, Camille had become a different person. He was now in his 50s, married, a leader in his church, and had won over Boston's medical establishment by founding a large independent clinic that specialized in allergy treatments. He was a nationally recognized expert on asthmatic patients, invited to symposiums, and interviewed on television. When researchers spoke to his daughters, who were now young adults, they called him an exemplary father, a really nice person. He could play very well like 5 years old does. So if it comes to that, we see that, that is interesting to see about the life changes and that if other people say something about you, it doesn't need to be right. Maybe it's a capture of the moment. And I think it's always important that you know by yourself what potential lays in you. So now today's talk and today's show comes to an end, and I hope you've taken something away for yourself. And join us again next week as we continue on this empowering journey, sharing real stories of triumph, upliftment, and empowerment. Remember, this time is a gift for you. Don't hesitate to get involved. And your voice is valued, and together we can make a difference. Thank you for being part of our community. And until next time, keep shining and empowering others. Together we rise, and together we make another way of storytelling. Every moment counts, every path counts, every step counts. You count, and every moment you breathe. Thank you for being here.